Hello, everybody. Welcome to Game Night. I'm your host, Dornell. Joining me tonight is our wonderful co-host, Daddy Warpig. Our special guest tonight, we're hanging out with Mark Kern. He's a veteran of the gaming industry, formerly of Blizzard. For those of you who don't know, he's responsible for countless breakups, bad grades, and hours of fun on World of Warcraft and Diablo 2, among others. Welcome to the show, Mark.
Thank you for having me. It's every topic that I like that you guys talk about. So this is gonna be fun.
Oh, I'm happy to hear that. Now we're going to talk about a lot of stuff tonight. Normally we're focused on like the tabletop RPGs here, but any game is welcome on game night. So I know that recently you've been doing a lot of work on your new um, massive online game, Ember.
That's right. We had our third successful crowdfunding. We approach it a little differently. We have it in what we call milestone funding, where we sort of deliver small goals along the way, and each one has been 500 or 600% funded. And the last one just sort of blew us away as we got the funding to build a playable mock-up, which we're going to use to start a Kickstarter in January timeframe for the game itself. And it's massive, but it's not an MMO. So I just want to put that out there.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of confusion on that, at least on my part, because it sounds like you've got sort of you're putting a few different play styles together and sort of creating like a combined experience. Because I read about things like mining and crafting, where you actually provide other players with materials, but the heart of the combat is a shooter. So I sort of get like a Battlefield feel from it.
Yeah, it is a somewhat of a unique blend, although we have attempted parts of this before in my prior game, Firefall, before they changed it. They changed it at launch from an open world shooter into a traditional sort of WoW game with guns. But before I left, what we were trying to do was essentially create a online shooter first experience in a persistent world. So that was a huge endeavor. We're taking a smaller slice of that. The best analogy I could think about is if you imagine a PlanetSide or PlanetSide 2 style game where you have sort of massive battles, except instead of player versus player, it's PvE, and you're fighting an NPC AI controlled alien army of shapeshifters that have giant kaiju at their disposal. So the idea is that you're in these small mechanized mechs going up against much larger beasts, and also these same sized shape-shifting aliens that can go between beast form and human form. And you have bases, and you have crafting components to that as well.
That sounds like a time sink right up your alley, and we've got some very pro kaiju people who listen to the show. So you just made a lot of fans right there.
Oh, I totally want to see. I mean, I'm just fascinated with it. I grew up in Japan, right? So I was watching these movies as a kid in Japan in the theaters, like Ultraman. I saw in the theater, and so Japan has always been a huge influence on me, and the kaiju sort of thing kind of stuck with me. And I'll tell you why. It's because Firefall, we had jetpacks and we had a lot of verticality, but there was nothing to fight with that verticality. You were always just sort of, everything was the same size or smaller creature than you, and people were just using it to sort of bunny hop and stay in the air and shoot down at other players, other enemies. And what I wanted to do was give you a reason. So I want kaiju to be big enough where you need to jet up to them, maybe wall run against their flanks. And they've got generators and other technology that the Sea-Hoo aliens have implanted in them to control them and give them additional weapons and gear. And you can sort of take those out, before you can take out the main kaiju. So that was kind of the inspiration. Was really like, well, we've got jetpacks. Let's give players something to shoot at with the jetpacks.
Man, I approve.
That was one of the best.
Good.
That was one of the best aspects of Mech Warrior 2. Is once you jumped out of your mech and you were the really, really small guy where you could use that jetpack to get around the battlefield and try and hack your way into another mech. Just being the small guy, you get squashed. You get totally eviscerated if you stood still. But if you used your mobility, you could move around the battlefield enough to avoid getting dead, and it was a lot more challenging. So it was nice to have both of those kind of gameplays together.
You know, I was encouraged recently by the E3 trailer of a game called, I guess, is it called Extinction, which is sort of a human versus Titan game. I guess it's more of a fantasy thing. Have you seen that guy with a sword running around and he jumps up against a huge monster, and it's pretty staged. Like you have to like take out his manacles and start chopping off his limbs. It's cartoony graphics before you can take him down.
I haven't seen it.
I've actually played Extinction. It's a 5-player, 4-on-1 asymmetrical PvP. So one person plays the giant monster, and then 4 other people play hunters. You've got to bring down the giant monster.
Oh, it's out? I thought it wasn't out yet.
I think Extinction's been out for a couple of years.
Oh, you're thinking Evolve.
Oh, am I thinking Evolve? Oh, I'm sorry. My apologies.
Yeah, no, Extinction is I think they just announced a trailer at E3. But in Evolve, the monster's not that big. We're talking, in both Extinction, Googling it now, and in Ember, we're talking about, beasts that get pretty large.
I did not see this trailer.
We're gonna have to check it out later.
I did like almost daily posts of E3. I watched everything I could. I watched all 6. I watched all 6 of the press conferences. I watched Nintendo's, Microsoft's, the Xbox One. I watched all of them, and I missed this somehow.
I did too. I didn't hear about this until I guess someone in our fandom mentioned it. And I looked at it and I was like, oh, cool. This is kind of like, it's nice to see how they're handling their giant-based combat for this.
Question from the chat. Nathan Housley is asking, are we talking about the same scale as Shadow of the Colossus?
No, that's really big. So I think we're somewhere in between. Although I'd like to see how big we can get. The initial...
That's what she said.
We do this in phases, right? And so we do have, at launch, we're only promising a certain size of kaiju. Probably, we arranged them in sort of homage to a lot of anime as well as specifically in categories. So we've got Cat 3, Cat 4, and you're really talking about Shadow of the Colossus would be our Cat 6, which is one of our largest kaiju, and we don't have any plans at launch for that. A lot of it depends on our earlier prototypes with smaller kaiju and what we can do there. But imagine, I mean, this is multiplayer, so it's a swarm of you versus one of these things. It's not just one of you.
Yeah, sort of like what you wish the raid boss was in World of Warcraft. Yeah, the dragon's big. Yeah, he'll eat the tank in 2 hits, but it just didn't seem big enough when all you could do is sort of run around on the floor of the cave and hop.
Yeah, I don't think I'll be happy until I can stand on the back of one and shoot down at its shield generators and blast out huge chunks of kaiju meat.
Delicious kaiju meat.
Now, I do have a question.
On this planet.
Oh, that's awful. I don't mean awful in terms of the game. I mean awful for the people living on that planet.
I mean, here I am, just minding my own business, mining some ore on this planet, and the huge chunk of kaiju meat comes down on what are you going to do?
Have a barbecue, Texas style.
My question was this, because I was curious about this, and I got this impression, but I haven't taken the time to verify it. Is your game that you're developing related at all to the role-playing game, to the tabletop role-playing game you made recently?
That's an interesting story. I started out wanting to get away from video games and go into tabletop, and I'd been a Traveler fan from way back, and It was one of the first tabletop games I ever picked up, I think, along with Dungeons and Dragons. I remember, I don't know if you remember, it came in a box set with a hexagon star map and a couple of black booklets with a really nice red stripe on them.
Yes.
And
this is the Free Trader Beowulf. That's the quote on this. The Free Trader Beowulf who's in deep trouble.
That's right. And that sucked me in. And I went through the character generator, and to this day, I think it's the only character generator in which you can die before your character actually gets made.
Womp womp.
Which was interesting. But yeah, I mean, I was, the part that I really liked about Traveller was I was having trouble getting my friends to sort of understand the role-playing aspects of it. Remember, I mean, we were all kind of new to D&D, and actually the whole genre was kind of new at the time. I mean, I'm sure people have been playing it for 10 years before me, but to my community, it was very new. And so when we looked at this, I think the part that appealed to me the most was the spacecraft. I mean, they had all these rules on how to build spacecraft in Traveller, and I really wanted to do that. And I was also interested in very old video games with spacecraft, like an old game called Sundog. Do you remember that on 8-bit computers?
Not me.
I'm so dating myself right now.
Oh, totally. I personally, I started in AD&D, so I missed the D&D Traveller days by just a couple of years. Which has made this whole thing fascinating, by the way, because all the people that we've been talking to have sort of slightly different takes on their gaming than you do. So it's been this great. If you have listened to the other game nights, like, it's been this great experience talking to other folks like Jeffro and Bradford Walker and them, who all come from that old school background, but slightly different views on it. So it's really cool to hear, like, what brings people into the gaming, like what appeals to them about it.
Oh, remember, I was growing up overseas too, in Southeast Asia, so these books were like precious. They were rare. You couldn't just, mail order them or go into a hobby store and get them. I remember having to fly to Hong Kong, which was a big shopping hub, and it was under the United Kingdom at the time. Hong Kong was owned by the United Kingdom. And there was a gaming shop there, and that's where I saw Traveller, and that's where I picked it up because I knew I couldn't get it anywhere else. Eventually, Mark Miller and I got to know each other, the creator of Traveller, and I've tried to buy Traveller from him several times. And I almost succeeded once, but he's smarter than that. and I was unable to buy the universe, but I decided, well, there's one aspect of that I'd really like to see developed even more. I mean, Traveller is a great system. I mean, there's many variants out there, and everyone's got their favorite version. Mine, I don't think I've ever successfully completed one of the classic games of Traveller, but I love that spaceship section so much. I wanted to make a spaceship-oriented tabletop. And what I mean by that is I wanted to have adventures in my spacecraft grouped with other players in their spacecraft. If you've ever played an MMO called Earth and Beyond, one of the early ones from Westwood Studios, a longtime former rival of Blizzard, they had an MMO and you could group up as spaceships in formation and kind of like go and take out pirates together and things like that. That was kind of the feeling that I'm trying to capture in our tabletop passion project called Krixa, which serves as the sort of background universe setting for the video game.
Okay, so that sort of answers my question, because I was wondering, like, each game has its own sort of style or expected play style, and you're really most interested in that spaceship, spacefaring, space combat sort of play, like, is because it sounds like you could just play a whole game of Krixa just as a miniatures game.
exactly, and move from encounter to encounter, and your spacecraft is as much of a character as you are. I mean, there's tons of games out there that do sci-fi role playing well, but I haven't found enough that really scratch my itch for sort of like, you know, spacecraft combat, and I don't mean it from a PvP perspective, although that certainly is doable. I really mean it from the fact that, you know, these are smaller. These could be smaller ships, or these could be capital ships, and you can have anything from small adventures where you're wending your way through a planetary system, and you have different encounters along the way as you try to get to the planet, all the way to, you know, hey, you're on capital ships and you're fighting some sort of interstellar space opera war. Those are the kind of adventures that I'm trying to get together here on tabletop.
I had a question, because I saw the website and the other art that you've put out for Krixa. And actually, I want to tell this story because this is a real story. This literally happened. I was looking at art on ArtStation, which is a great resource for cover artists or other illustrators. If people listening are looking for illustrators for their books, full color or black and white, ArtStation is a great resource. And I saw this guy and I'm like, oh, that looks awesome. I love it. And I was flipping through his portfolio and each piece was just really incredible. And then when I went and looked at his bio, it said working on the Krixa RPG. And I'm like, oh, Mark totally got him.
I did. That's Cole Price, and he's a former art director at Ubisoft, and he makes these fantastic spaceship paintings that I was looking for this stuff. I was looking for an updated version of Chris Voss. Do you know who Chris Voss is?
Nope.
Okay. Chris Voss, if you ever read a sci-fi book that was written in the 60s and 70s, he did all the, like, so many covers for Asimov and for other people. And he had these wonderful books of spaceship art and these old relics. And that art style really spoke to me. A game that was inspired by that art style is Homeworld. If you've ever played the video game Homeworld, that's a Chris Voss inspired sort of design. Chris is still designing stuff. If you watch Guardians of the Galaxy, those are his designs in there, obviously updated. But I was looking for that style, and I stumbled upon Cole Price, and he's not only an amazing artist, he's very fast. So I'm sitting on a ton of spaceship art that we've already created to sort of for the look and feel of the Krixa game, all done by his wonderful talent. So
I do know Chris Voss because there is a Twitter account that's 1970s sci-fi art, and they tweet out a ton of cover pictures every now and then. And so his really, really unique, almost geometric paintings on top of the structure of the spaceship, where he's got, he's got the checkerboard squares that are yellow and black, and he's got red and yellow hash marks, and he's got solid blue and white. It's very, very distinctive.
Oh yeah, it's sort of like graphic design slapped on top of really interesting shapes and forms that are very massive feeling and mysterious feeling. You get a sense of mystery when you look at these ships and you just want to go explore them.
Well, I see why you like the guy. Just looking at some of the examples of his work, just like you were saying, putting that graphic design on top of those shapes, it's an artist who bothers to ask, okay, what if all the, like when you watch sci-fi movies and stuff in the future, especially the bad ones, everything's not formless but colorless. You know, everything's like monochrome or all metal or all glass. Walk through a modern city center these days, but these paintings, they're like, let's put color on these. Like imagine the ancient Greek statues. You remember that they painted the statues and they painted the columns and everything like that, and you've got the same thing going on in Krixa.
Oh yeah, numbers and stripes and patterns on top of really strange shapes that make you think, what does this craft do? What is it for? how does it function? And and there's so much art that that we've generated for the game already that I was going full bore. I was going to go into the 1.0 rule set and start playing it here at with my friends in the local hobby store. And then a funny thing happened on the way. we had a situation where I guess, I don't know, maybe the Firefall servers experienced their first shutdown on Steam, and there was no word, and everyone thought the game was being canceled. And players started asking if I would, buy the IP and revive Firefall. And I tried. I guess I'm really bad at offering to buy other people's IPs, because Mark Miller wouldn't sell it to me twice. And now I'm trying to buy Firefall, and they weren't having it. They released a statement saying that Firefall's future was well and healthy, and 3 months later they fired everybody at the studio, unfortunately. But I was ready to run with that. But when they wouldn't do it, fans still wanted the original vision of Firefall, these sort of the invasion systems of in Firefall, the aliens were called the Chosen, and the ultimate bad guy was the Melding, an energy source that had come into this dimension to sort of disassemble our universe for energy. And players remember that we had these massive invasions in the zones, and they would have to go around and fight them off the watchtowers and the cities. And so I said, well, if they're not going to let me have Firefall, I could bake this into the Krixa universe, because the Krixa universe is a story of 28 different human colonies that are separated by the lack then of light speed travel. And so they diverged, and so they're very diverse, even biologically in some cases, as they sort of evolved hundreds of years apart from each other. The neat thing is that they could still communicate. They have tachyon communication. They're able to actually talk to each other in real time, and there's stuff related to the game and a book I'm working on related to that, where they're actually all playing an MMO together, a fantasy MMO in this universe. Anyways, that's a little side story, but so you have these divergent colonies, and one of them is the Gate Striders. And the Gate Striders, when faster than light travel was invented through jump gates, they had to sort of build these gates, but you didn't know what was on the other side. And you couldn't send a probe back, because the nature of tachyon communications means you need to know exactly the return destination in order to beam a message back. So probes couldn't send information back to the gate. You had to go through with a team and build a return gate over, even with modular pieces. It's a process that took at least several weeks, if not months. And so, one of these factions, the Gate Striders, would go through and sort of be sort of like the frontiers people that go out and discover new stuff, and they would come back with the information after several weeks, or you'd never hear from them again. They could fall into a black hole, or you don't know what. So Ember is a planet that gets discovered by these Gate Striders, and it has a very unique property, because it's actually first contact for the humans with an alien species that's truly Xeno, not like the divergent colonies that started. So that is sort of the short version of the lore backstory of how the two games fit together. If you think about it in tabletop terms, the Gate Striders and Ember is 1/28 for the game, the tabletop game.
Sure, or one story that could be told that sort of is implied by the universe, or follows from the universe.
Exactly.
So when you were designing a game, did you do the mechanical design, the game mechanical design yourself?
It's never on a big team. It's always a group effort. For WoW, I was much more of a team lead. It was building a whole company around the game, not just producing and managing the game itself. Although the parts I did work on were the UI system and the quest system, exclamation points over people's heads, the format of how we do questing, all that stuff. But as time went on, it just got too big, and we had people split all along those duties, and I was managing more and more of just getting the game and the company around the game shifted into a service-oriented sort of thing. In Firefall, yeah, I was much more hands-on on mechanics up until Tears during beta, and then again, sort of the business side pulled me away as we were dealing more and more with our investors, the Nine, and the team took on the responsibility of the rest of the design at that point, and we started to see a lot of changes then. So, I think the lesson I learned from that is that I do a lot better when I stick to design in the game, both for my own sanity as well as enthusiasm. The business side, while necessary, can really distract you. So I'm doing everything I can, and that's another reason we're doing crowdfunding, so I can focus and be 100% on the game's mechanics, guiding it along the way.
With the obviously stepping out of where you've been professionally, usually in designing the game mechanics of a tabletop game, because a whole different set of requirements, a whole different set of limitations on how complex given systems or mechanics can be. Were you designing that primarily, the tabletop game, primarily by yourself, or did you have other tabletop designers come on in the company?
No, this is and remains a passion project. It's like, hey, can I make a tabletop game? It's kind of a challenge because I've never done it before, and it is very different. And one thing that I'm also struggling with is, it's kind of strange. Let's talk about this, because you guys have this insight into sort of the history and where the tabletop community is now that I don't, and it's very curious to me, because obviously, a Byzantine set of rules, especially if you look at some of the later versions. And the trend seems to be much more towards very quick and open systems. I mean, D&D 5th edition is super streamlined. And in some ways, that's different from what I'm used to and growing up with. And in some ways, it's more the same to classic D&D, right? And I think there's a sort of movement for this stuff. I forget what it's called. Where
Old school Renaissance, the OSR.
OSR, baby.
OSR, that's what it is. And I think what you're seeing now is a little bit of OSR creeping into modern tabletop RPGs. But you tell me, what are we seeing?
So
specifically, if you want to talk about the history of RPG design, what I saw an article on recently, they're calling it the 4th generation of OSR. The first generation of OSR was all about making modules, using the open source for 3rd edition D&D to make modules for classic D&D that was no longer being published, to where you could only buy these books either by pirating the PDF or going to a used bookstore. And so they wanted to make modules for the older version. That's where the OSR got started. 4th generation is taking some of the game design concepts, some of the high-level ideas behind classic D&D and Traveller and Tunnels and Trolls and all of that 1970s gaming, and then using that with game mechanics that are almost wholly divorced from D&D, that don't have necessarily classes or armor class or saving throws or hit points, but they're still heavily influenced by a lot of the same concepts that went into classic D&D, 0th edition D&D, or AD&D. But what you're talking about is exactly right, is that you're seeing a lot of games now that aren't D&D derivatives, but are nevertheless heavily influenced, but their design philosophy is heavily influenced by D&D, and so it's coming back in a different way.
Well, let's talk a little bit about what we talked about prior to the show here, and I have no relation to this game. I'm not showing from them or anything, but it's called Open Legends, and it's an open source rule set, very streamlined, where it's basically make up your own classes, make up your own weapons and abilities, and just go for it with a very loose structure of rules in place to sort of guide you along. That I found that seems like sort of like what you're talking about. It seems like the penultimate version of where this is headed. And I know that my friends who tried it have immediately switched from Pathfinder to it, for example.
Well, let me try and explain what I feel is the reason you see that. And in my opinion, this is the most important lesson that the OSR people have learned thus far, because one of the techniques they use to try and revive these old style games is they try and figure out and study Like, how did the old gamers actually play? Like, what were all these rules for? And I think the most insightful thing I've ever read, a couple people have expressed this idea or something like it, is that the, the point of the game is to give the game master or the referee a framework to work with. It's something that the game master uses to create the sort of systems and games that people like to play. So in a bad game of Dungeons and Dragons, it feels too much like a board game where you've got this menu of options and your character does this and there's a monster and the only really meaningful way to interact with it is to kill it, right? But
Right.
this sort of simplified game system that says, okay, these are the tools that you use to give your players what you want. This is the players need to know how to play. So here's the here's your character. This is what your character is good at. This is what your character is bad at. And then whatever you want to do, the game's open to you. And I think that's the strongest thing that the OSR community has discovered, that the game system, not everything needs to be written out in the game system. The game master is going to devise those mini games or those mini systems on the spot.
It's a lot like how I DM. My style of DMing, it's sort of like I as the rules got more complicated, I left it to the players to sort it out. I was more interested in the story flow of the combat. What epic things were people trying, and then we'd sort of like either I'd call a player, say, hey, is there a rule for that, or should we make one here? And then we'd sort of like set goals and have fun sort of defining it that way. And my modules were very loose. In fact, I love things like city adventures and wilderness adventures where anything can happen, and we just sort of ad-libbed along the way. I would sketch out a framework of the world, and I would sketch out a framework of the political situation or the adventure situation, and sometimes I would hand out cards, so everyone would have different pieces of information about this world, and they would get XP for sharing that or bringing that up in the game. So I had the players sort of telling each other what this world was about along the way, and we had a lot of fun with that. It's not a style for everybody. I know that some of my friends really want to min-max their characters and have the chance to to show that they've done a good job with that. But as for me, this is the way that I DM.
Yeah, no, you definitely, that's a lot of old school flavor in there. And you've got the thing that you said that was really important is there a rule for this, or do we make one up on the spot? That's the key insight. That's the key takeaway for me, which is you don't need to have a rule for everything spelled out. That's how you get the D&D 3.5 game, which is actually, I think it's a great game, but it's not an ideal role-playing game. Because it's a little too crunchy. I had an experience where I started DMing with 3.5, and I had to switch just because even though I knew the rule set, it was too heavy. It was always getting in the way.
Let me go into a little bit of game design philosophy for the game I'm working on right now. There is a core mechanic that most of the rules are built off of. And all of the specific skills and skill use and other rules are all examples of how to apply that core mechanic to different situations, how to apply it to combat, how to apply it to lockpicking, how to apply it to vehicle chases, how to apply it to shooting guns. And the reason all the mechanics are examples is they're intended to be a pattern for the game master to learn how to use that core mechanic flexibly in any situation they want, so that when they encounter a new situation that I haven't written an explicit rule for, they can just say, oh, okay, I set the challenge rating at this is what you're going to be using to go for it, and this is what the success levels mean. Easy. It is, so all of the rules themselves and all of the examples of skill use are nothing more than a tutorial to help teach game masters how to apply the specific rule to a bunch of situations that aren't directly covered in the rule book. That's the theory that I'm working off of. That's what I'm trying to implement.
But that's really interesting, because it's sort of like, and I agree with a lot of that, and now you're providing a set of philosophies about the approach to designing systems for the game that the DM can learn. But how are you finding? One thing I worried about when I thought about that was, the DM's burden, right? We're in a time where everyone has a lack of time, and it's hard enough to put a traditional module together. How do we overcome the DM's burden, especially how do you keep the philosophy straightforward enough that they can easily conjure up and apply the rules to new situations?
Well, I mean, how do you multiply the content available to you in Diablo 2? Randomly generated dungeons.
Yeah, and Traveler, back to Traveler. Traveler has a lot of that in it.
You got it. So I have two answers to that question. The first one is reduce character creation to 0. Make it as short and sweet as possible. This does a couple of things. Not only does it achieve your goal, but it also makes it it's not so hard on players when their characters die, because they're like, oh, I'll get a new one in 5 minutes. The other thing is, in D&D, it's the random monster table. In another type of game like Traveler, randomly generated events or planets or things like that. The sort of thing where if the DM has a toolbox that includes those kinds of systems, you can generate parts of the game that don't need to be written ahead of time. Because when you say module, you're thinking like I think. Like, I grew up on all the story games and the D&D 2nd edition, the D&D 3rd edition games, where they had these cool stories that were written out, or like in a World of Warcraft perspective, like a quest, like, hey, this thing is happening, so go here, do the thing, kill the bad guys, and come back and you'll get some loot. And
yeah, I think the penultimate version of I mean, for me, the heavy modules guided story thing peaked with the Dragonlance series. I was blown away when I first saw that, because I mean, there was a whole epic storyline woven into that, and things happened in sequences, and I'd never seen that before. It was always just a room-to-room dungeon crawl before that.
Yeah, and all you need to get rid of the DM's burden is, not every game has to be a dungeon crawl, but if you use those sorts of tools that have been rediscovered by the OSR community, random monster tables and stuff like that, the much maligned random monster table, right? You play a few games like that, and if your dungeon master is creative enough to make those events fit into the world seamlessly, you'll find that the players are telling the stories themselves. And all you have to do in between sessions is keep your stock of material, and when they come up with cool ideas, run with it.
Yeah, I much prefer that approach. I like, what I'll do is I'll have a binder, and I'll have a couple of storyline rolled up, and I'll have a couple of an outline with key story events, but not much more than that. Everything else in between, we sort of wing, along the way. And I've done that style, and I've also done where it's literally just a dungeon crawl, and we are randomly generating rooms as we go. And it's kind of hilarious, because I don't know if you've ever played that childhood game where you fold a piece of paper into thirds, and someone draws a head, and then you fold it over so they can't see, and then someone else has to draw the body, and you fold it over and someone else has to draw the legs. Sometimes you get really interesting results that way, and working with your players where they don't know exactly where you're headed with the story and you're not sure either, it can sort of, I mean, it's hit or miss, but when it works, I think it's really entertaining.
Oh yeah, totally. I think it's different for every DM, but I love the way you're using the word story, because you're still trying to tell a story. And I guess my perspective is that if a non-player character becomes an antagonist, I can work with that. Like, an evil cleric, escapes for the 3rd time. Maybe this time he killed the bard. And believe me, when you play 5th edition, please kill the bard. you know, he'll become a villain. You don't have to have written that sort of thing ahead of time. On the other hand, you could, yeah, I mean, having a backstory can help in the sense that, well, I know that there's this evil god and he's got this cult of people and they like to do this sort of thing. So you can always come in, you can always tie what they do together. But especially in the terms of the dungeon crawl, it's all about the survival. How deep can we go? How do we avoid fighting? How can we win if we have to fight? How can we get at that treasure? That's a fun game in and of itself.
I guess taking that idea into video games. One type of MMO that I always wanted to see was, I call it a mini MMO, because I don't see this as hundreds of players or thousands of players online, but maybe only at any one time 100 or 200 logged in to a single shard. But it's sort of like an infinite dungeon where it's really just about how deep can you go, and we sort of randomly generate things along the way. So I guess it's like Diablo 1, right? A little bit of Diablo 1, but it never really stops. And
a rogue-like.
And it's an MMO type of situation where it's not just a couple of players, but enough to make it interesting. Obviously, watching anime, it kind of reminds me of Sword Art Online, or God, I don't know the Japanese game of it. Like, was it How to Date a Girl in a Dungeon? With Hestia, I can't remember. Where they have the idea of a central town and sort of an infinite number of levels. Well, in Sword Art Online there was finite, but it was that sort of progression where all the players are working together to try to unlock the next gate, unlock the next section together. I thought that would make it interesting, where it's not a whole world, but it's just sort of this procedural dungeon crawl where players are working together to unlock more and more of it.
I would definitely give that sort of game a try. That sounds like it could be a lot of fun. Especially if you made character death permanent. That would be interesting.
Oh, yeah, that would be an interesting twist to it. Yeah, I think that would definitely matter more.
Because that would really, you would definitely answer the question, how deep can you go?
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm always interested in the idea of players pushing themselves. In Ember, the mining is not a passive thing; it's an active encounter where you can continue to try to mine for as long as you want to push for more rare resources, which pop at the tail end. But if you go too far, your thumper mech, which is doing the mining and you're defending it from waves and creatures, gets destroyed and you lose all the resources. So that's sort of my version of permadeath in Ember, for that same sort of gameplay mechanic where it's really about how far you can push it. I'm just fascinated by that.
Oh yeah, I love that. That's classic dungeon crawl. If you get those types of players in the thumpers, they're gonna love that game. The chat's delayed by a few seconds, so I want to go back. A couple of people have made some insightful comments that may help you out
Sure.
with your RPG questions. Bradford Walker in the chat calls it RPG's Schrodinger's game, especially when you do that sort of random generated thing. Not much is certain until you actually get to the actual gameplay. When he says, "Little is certain until play fixes it." So.
Mm-hmm. That's a good way to put it. Isn't that every DM's module that they crafted over? It's like the best made plans, never survive first contact with the enemy.
That's exactly right, because the game masters in this, well, everything just went to hell. I don't know if you know why I wrote these down. You know what? Let's just see what they do. Great advice, in my opinion, from John Mollison also says, good notes taken during the game are far more useful than the volumes of prepared material. So I'm guilty. I'm guilty. I neither prepare anything nor do I take notes during the game, so I'm bad.
It takes a good DM though to roll. I mean, with an evolving storyline where you only have the initial story hook, but that's part of the thrill for me. That's harder than any rule set, getting any rule set right. And I would argue it's actually more fun of the two.
Yeah, now that I think about it, there's a website that I always send DMs to because he basically taught me how to DM. It's a guy named Justin Alexander. and so that's where I get a lot of my advice from. That's where I learned to DM. You'd like a lot of the stuff that he says, and you're not going to agree with most of it, I think, but you'll definitely enjoy reading. I'll send you the
Cool.
link for that afterwards.
Yeah, no, I'd love to see that. I mean, I just love to see all the different approaches, and a lot of it depends on the players you have too. You're going to have to sort of tailor it to whoever your friends are and how they like to play.
Absolutely, absolutely. Let's see. Well, I'm really. Let me just say before we move on, I'm really excited to see. I mean, I love video games and I love what you're doing with Ember, but I'm really excited to see what comes out of Krixa. That sounds like a really fun game that I'd like to sit down and play.
I mean, thank you for that, because I've been looking around and I really haven't found a Starship Adventure game tabletop. Maybe there is. Does it? I'm sure somebody's made one that's caught some level of popularity. Are there any good ones I should be looking at?
I haven't heard of any. I'm actually not a spaceship game type of guy. I'm pretty much a strict fantasy guy with the occasional cyberpunk thrown in. What do you say, Daddy Warpig?
Honestly, I don't know. I've never looked for a game that is focused on the Starship level of player control. You do have games like, depending on which version of Star Wars you're running, where you have a number of different players who are all on the ship. And you have one person who is usually the tech head who likes upgrading everything and tinkering with stuff, but never where like each player and I'm not saying they're not out there, just I'm not aware of any, where each player has their own ship and they're working in concert as a small fleet. I mean, that does sound interesting. That sounds really, really cool. And the Star Wars game I'm playing currently is sort of converging on that. We have like 6 or 7 players, but 3 of us have our own ships now because we've been acquiring them from various means, and been upgrading them for different things. One person's upgraded their freighter to be a pirate hunter. I stole an Imperial shuttle and have turned it into a luxury passenger vessel, and another person has a fighter, like a Y-wing fighter that they're trying to trick out to be the nastiest fighter that they can. So I guess we're kind of edging towards that area, but I've never seen a game that has that as a focus.
Okay, well, I'm either doing something really new or doing something that I really shouldn't do because nobody's going to want to play. But that's why it's a passion project. It's really a kind of a grand experiment here.
Many people who are ever since the introduction of 3rd edition D&D, the production values that are expected of RPGs has shot through the roof. People expect now, full color page layouts, full color art, basically what you're giving into, or what you're putting into Krixa. And I'm just wondering, have you found? I got lost to the real question on the way through that detour. The real question was this: so there has grown up in the role-playing community, it's become more and more specialized and more professionalized, where hobbyists outside of the OSR, which was one of the good things about the OSR, is because hobbyists could go there to get published, and the expectations for artwork and graphic design weren't as high. But it seems to me a lot more clannish than it used to be. And I'm wondering, on a professional level, have you had a lot of interactions with the industry, as people call it, the people who've been or are in the professional RPG sphere? Have you interacted with them a lot?
No, not at all. It seems very cliquey the more I look into it, which is a concern for marketing the game. It's like, how do you make inroads? I think that I'm pretty much looking at doing an open source version of the game, sort of like how Open Legends did it, as a way to sort of like get direct to the community and bypass the gatekeepers. And one thing that's worked for us in terms of Ember is really starting with the community first. This is why all our crowdfunding succeeds so well, even though we're crowdfunding really basic stuff. Like we don't even have, you know, a working game yet. We have an art demo, we have concept art. You know, how you get stuff funded just based on that, and the answer is really building a community around it. So I don't know the answer to that. I think that the insular nature and let's just put it this way. I'm starting to believe cons don't matter anymore, like they used to. But you're not reaching as many players as you can if you find some other way to do it online. Like, well, let me. Go ahead.
You mean if you're talking about gaming cons in particular? I would agree. I'm definitely part of the community that doesn't go to cons. Last show, I talked with someone, Bradford C. Walker, who is all about playing at the cons. You know, his local con, and it's two different communities as far as gaming goes.
Exactly. I think, but you have to find a community in order to succeed in finding a market for your game now. And one thing that a lot of people don't realize is when you count con attendance, like give me a number, like what's a con and how much was their attendance?
If I remember right, Origins is about 30,000 and Gen Con is a little more, but about the same.
Okay, so let's take that as an example. 30,000 is not actually 30,000 people. Did you know this about cons? That what they measure, what they tend to publicize. This is like how games used to publicize sales. They would publicize their sell-in numbers, not their sell-through numbers. What that means is they would publicize, you know, how many copies they sold to retailers, not actually how many copies ended up in consumers' hands. Or when they reported concurrency numbers for their online games, they would report basically things like, you know, they would add up their peaks through the week sometimes. It got really kind of shady for a while. Well, for a lot of cons, including PAX, and PAX is the one where I learned about this, when they say 30,000, they're measuring people who go through the turnstiles every day, people who badge in every day or go through the doors. And so you're actually, you know, what we learned with PAX is that we had the actual number of people we were reaching is divided by the number of days on that.
Oh boy!
So if a con is 30,000, it's a 3-day thing, then it's 10,000. Now that's not true of everybody. I'm sure that some people are publicizing how many badges they sold, but you know, but when you're competing with other cons that are inflating their numbers through this sort of turnstile technique, you end up sort of using their measure, their yardstick, in order to be able to compare apples to apples with your competitors. So I don't know. But I think that con numbers. The point is that, okay, you've got 30,000 at Gen Con. I think you can reach a whole lot more people online with some video work and have it be a lot stickier than the small percentage of people at con that are going to stop by your booth and see your new game.
I would definitely bet on that. I mean, just think of all the exposure you get going on Tabletop or, you know, Geek and Sundry's other shows, like with Will Wheaton. You know, he gets a lot of exposure. That's yet another community in tabletop gaming, a much maligned community, but I mean, they've got a lot of fans. Absolutely. I don't think the cons matter so much. PAX might be different. Even though PAX's numbers might be inflated, they do sell out instantly every year.
Yeah, I mean, PAX can be very influential, but even then, you know, if you're an indie booth off to the side, you know, what fraction of people are actually stopping by your booth? Not a whole lot. So I think the numbers in terms of, I mean,
like converting that attendance into, you know, actual eyeballs on your project. That's totally different.
Exactly, because you have to take that into account too. I've seen a lot of indie video game developers do this, where they go after mainstream press articles because they think that's going to bring them exposure, and they go after shows, and shows cost money and time. And what I found is that building a digital community online is not only infinitely cheaper and less time away from developing the game, I think it's better. I think, you know, it's not easy, but I think putting the effort into that is paying off, at least on the video game side, a lot more than what I've done before with cons and things like that.
I think selection bias might have something to do with it. It's when you get people signing up for your, video game, watching your video game videos and stuff like that. They're people who are interested already in what you're doing, and when you go set up at a con, the people going there are people who like going to that con. You know what I mean? There isn't necessarily an overlap there.
Exactly, and this kind of comes back to the original point, which was, hey, there's a close-knit team of designers out there. Have you interacted with them a lot? And I think the nature of the question was, what's the value of either interacting with them a lot or not interacting with them a lot, and what are the risks? And to my point of view, it's like, I think that this insular group of designers that are prolific have fan bases, right? And if you can reach their fan base, if you become friends with them, or you partner up with stuff, that can be extremely valuable. And being outside of it, I think, is definitely harder. But at the same time, I think there's so many other tools now that you can use to create your own digital communities. I mean, Discord has been crazy for us. I'll hop onto Discord and I'll go on voice, and we can call them sheep chats. And normally we only do them every couple of weeks on a Sunday, but I'm usually there, especially during fundraisers. I was there every day, just impromptu reaching out to people. And Discord is great because it's a persistent chat. I mean, if you go away and you come back, you can scroll back and read the history. That's what really makes it kind of unique. It's as well as a really polished and easy and fun to use user interface. But I think there's a lot of tools out there that can do that. Now, as far as game design influence, yeah, I guess I don't have the benefit of bouncing questions off of people already in the industry. But I'll tell you one thing: when we built WoW, we didn't know anybody. People said we would fail because none of us were MMO veteran designers, and we had never made an MMO before in the history of the company. And the teams we brought on had never made an MMO. And yet, that didn't stop us. So, I think, no, I don't know that community, and I don't have the benefit of bouncing ideas off of them, or even accessing part of their audience if they like what I'm doing. But at the same time, I'm kind of used to that, working in that environment where I don't have that kind of support, and I have to go learn it all and then build it from scratch.
Like I said, I'm designing my own game, and so at some point in the future, when I want to start getting move beyond just the rules and start putting graphic design and art together, I'm really fascinated with, as an outsider, how you put that together, because it's obvious to me you've got high production values, and you pick some just some incredible artists. I've been, honestly, while I've been listening to you guys, I've been flipping through Cole Price's his portfolio on ArtStation. He just has some amazing, incredible pieces, and so I find that whole discussion of how you started putting the book together, put the rules together, and got your art together, because it seems like it's come together really, really well. Have
you seen the small 20-page book we did for Ember with the design vision doc?
No, I haven't.
We generated a PDF and a print version for this, and it was actually my dry run at laying out high production value game rules. For example, I was actually looking at RPG rule books for inspirations on the graphic design, and that was very interesting. I had to learn a program called Adobe InDesign, but I kind of had a background in some book layout way back from when the Mac first hit and people were using PageMaker, and so that knowledge, I mean, for good or bad, the programs haven't changed that much. That knowledge sort of translated to when I had to put together this book recently, and then. And I'm a photographer, and I also do a lot of post production on photos. So I'm very familiar with Photoshop, and then I'm also a 3D artist for hard surface modeling. I can't do characters, but I have worked in the industry in early in my career as a 3D modeler, and over the past 2 years I picked it up again with modern programs. So the combination of those skills has kind of allowed me to lay out this book very quickly, and of course the tremendous art that's provided by Cole Price and everybody else makes that so much easier to do. I think I think good art is like you said, really important these days. People expect it. And one thing I've always been good at is going out and finding talent. And I was able to do that prior to the internet, and I was able to do that after the internet. If you're a fan and you follow these sites and you know the art that you like, go talk to these people, because 9 times out of 10 they're going to answer you back, and you might just find a connection on a project or something that they get excited about, and you can work something out. But if you never talk to them, if you never reach out to them, it's never going to happen. So I don't know what the secret is, and obviously it's easier now that I've got a background and games behind me, but I've been doing this pretty much all my life. I mean, when I was starting out in games and completely unknown, I would go to universities. I would go to like some of the best art schools, and I'd go over to MIT, and I would just start looking for people. And I don't wait for people to come to me. I've never recruited that way. I've always said, I want that person or I want that person, and I go out and I do everything I can to get them on board.
I've got one last question about the game itself. Are you planning on rules for naval combat?
I'm trying. I get asked that all the time. There are no oceans in Ember, so the only naval battles would have to be, I don't know, PvP belly bumping contests. I don't.
Okay.
And I think you've got to weigh 300 pounds and we're killed. That's the minimum bar. Either that or it's going to turn into another anime. Like, I don't know if there's a lot of anime fans in the channel, but there's one where there's a sports game where women fight with their butts and boobs, I guess. It's on in a pool. I haven't watched it yet, but I mean, yeah. So, yeah, I don't want to go there with my naval combat, so I think we're talking, big guys caber tossing and yeah, a lot of beer.
when Crix the anime comes out, we'll have all the naval battles you want.
There you go. when we finally go full.
That's when you'll know you've made it. Right, that's when you'll know you've made it. World of Warcraft, no, CEO of NAS, screw that. I have my own anime based on my IP. That's it. That's how you know you've made it.
Exactly. And I have waifu pillows of all my main characters.
So we've been going for about an hour. We can talk as long as you like. We don't have a time limit, but I'd like to go to another topic that we wanted to talk about really quick before we wrap things up. Someone else in the chat was also asking about this. What's going on with Legacy WoW?
Yeah, I'm starting to get more and more questions about that because I guess Blizzard just shut down another fan server for vanilla WoW. And I guess the guy had been working on it for 4 years. And I don't know why they do this, but they put their server up in an easy to take down place, like the United States with strong IP laws. So this server was taken down in like a day. And on one hand, it's really unfortunate that this guy who worked for 4 years on this server had the server taken down. On the other hand, if you're going to do that and you're serious about it, go set up your infrastructure in somewhere else, that isn't reachable by U.S. copyright law. And third, Blizzard is within all their rights to do that. I mean, it's their game. They invested in it. They created the universe. They created the game. They're responsible for its popularity. They have every right to do that. The part I don't like is how Blizzard won't give an answer on legacy servers. And I don't know if it's been a year or so now where we did the petition when they shut down Nostalrius to get Blizzard to make legacy servers. We got it big enough to where several 100,000 people signed the petition. We were talked about by prominent YouTubers in the WoW community. And then, you know, I promised to take the petition, the printed petition, to Mike, and I printed out the whole thing. I made a video, and I met with Mike, and we talked for several hours about it. Especially from my perspective of having been team lead on the project, about what it would take to get it up and running again. And then to have them turn around and install his team and give them the red carpet treatment and everything else. And then absolute silence. Like, it was painful to get email replies about it afterwards. And it was always sort of like, well, wait until BlizzCon and things like this. And when BlizzCon rolled around, they banned questions about Legacy WoW. You could not even ask them. They would be filtered out. They would be rejected out of hand. How do you now actually look at that with any sort of belief that that effort was sincere on Blizzard's part to address the demand in the community of legacy servers? So that part is just, I don't know. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah. I remember at the time when you did the position and you met with Mike Morhaime, right? It was you interpreted their silence to be that they're going to go through whatever, you know, everybody's going to talk about it and think about it, and they're going to come up with the answer, whatever the answer is going to be. You know, they're going to come up with the answer, and then we'll hear about it. And that never happened. And so they're just silencing every, you know, we're just not going to talk about it, which is it's a really weird thing to do.
I don't understand it. I mean, why not give a definitive answer like, we've thought about it, we thank everyone for their input, but, you know, for various reasons we decided this is not the time. Perhaps someday in the future we'll revisit the issue. I remember at Blizzard giving interviews, we would always, that was kind of our go-to. Like, we knew we wanted to do console games at some point, but we weren't ready. We would at least give an answer. We would say, listen, we have no plans at this time, but we do love consoles. A lot of us play it, and at one point we're going to revisit it. I think fans at this point need a better answer, especially after everything everyone has done to demonstrate to Blizzard, not only did we show that there's a demand for it, not only did we show that you can make money for it. I mean, I pretty much laid out with my, you know, based on how much we did to build WoW, what it would cost and everything else. Not only did we show that we can overcome the technological problems, some of the data loss that occurred and things like that. I mean, Nostalria's teams sent over after their meeting a huge doc with everything needed to reconstruct what was missing. And, you know, and I was pitching in ideas there too. To go through all that and have the fans so in a fervor about it and then not give them a definitive answer, I think is really dropping the ball. It's not the Blizzard that I'm used to.
It seems un-Blizzard-like, doesn't it?
And in the meantime, we get, you know, remastered levels of Diablo 2 and a StarCraft remaster coming out. I mean, it's just like, wait, you just said in an interview, one thing they held up was they did an interview where they, on Legacy WoW, they said, well, look at our interview when we talked about rebooting some of our older RTSs. They just aren't fun anymore. You know, that time is past. And yet here they are remastering StarCraft. You know, just...
Yeah. Weird.
I don't understand. And the amount of, you know, maybe it's an issue because there's a live game out there, right? There's a game out there that's very different from what Vanilla WoW was. And it's not something that's been put to bed yet. It's still generating vast amounts of income. But I didn't get a sense that there was any sort of financial worry about it. I did get a sense that there was a quality worry about it, that, oh, if we put out something next to WoW, it's just not going to look as good and we're going to get dinged for it. And it's like, no, I think that's wrong. I think players would totally understand that this is a nostalgia romp and that the expectations for, you know, everything would be different. And, you know, and I can't tell you how many times I sat down and ran the math with all the stuff that I know, having launched WoW, and it just comes out as money for Blizzard every time I do it. So I simply do not understand this apathy, and I especially do not understand the complete I think, irresponsibility of not giving this huge fan base an answer.
Well, that's too bad. I mean, I won't say that they deserve it. They deserve an answer, but I mean, it seems like, for lack of a better word, it's the right thing to do, to just say, hey guys, no. You know, it's obvious that the answer is no, never.
Mm-hmm.
But they could just say, sorry guys, we're not interested.
Yeah, it's just very painful to be left hanging, isn't it, for over a year now? So
yeah, the World of Warcraft vanilla fans as jilted ex-lovers. Sad but true. I like my humor dark, by the way.
Well, okay. So Diablo 2 is much more your game than Diablo 3. So, well, you know, I hate to say it too, but all will be for, they can jilt us all they want, but as soon as they announce WoW Legacy, all will be forgiven, right? Those fans will come right back around.
There's no doubt. I didn't even play vanilla. I started playing Burning Crusade, and I tell you what, I had so much more fun spending 7 hours in Blackrock Depths than I did going from red zone to blue zone to green zone to purple zone in Burning Crusade. I get why there's a lot of nostalgia for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, maybe there'll be a return to old school MMOs, just like we're talking about, OGR and tabletop. I don't know.
That's a great, yeah, definitely. OSR tabletop, OSR old school, XP penalty on death old school MMOs.
Yeah, OSR. That's the acronym.
So, related question from the chat, Macario Patrick wants to know what your opinion is on a Firefall private server.
I guess it could be done. You can make a pirate private server of anything. I know that there was a project when they shut the servers down to do a lot of data packet capture from the Firefall servers, and it's possible. You know, obviously, it would face the same legal issues. They'd get shut down left and right. Obviously, nothing that we could engage in, or that's like sort of like instant road to lawsuit. Would I like to see it? Yeah, just like I'd like to see vanilla WoW servers. You know, it's a secret pleasure.
Cool. All right. I think we're just about out of time. Daddy Warpig, last chance for any questions or thoughts from you.
I might have other things I'd like to ask a question about, but I don't need to do it tonight. I very much appreciate you taking the time to come on, Geek Gab, and I hope when your next round of funding for Ember goes live, we'll toss that out there so people can come and check that out.
Oh, very cool. Appreciate that. Yeah, I think, you know, doing that through, like I said, grassroots communities and outreach really pays off, and I'd love to do that on your show. So,
cool.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I mean, not to speak for Daddy Warpig, but we'll bring on Geek Gab Prime for a show.
Okay.
No, seriously, that was a lot of fun. Anything else you want to say or add before we wrap it up?
No, I just really enjoyed talking about the tabletop portion. You know, that part's fascinating to me, and like I said, Krixa is something that I'm definitely planning on completing here for the first rule sets and getting out there. And I want to be more plugged into the tabletop community, and this was a great way just to get everyone's insight on it. So thank you, and if you are in the tabletop community, please follow me at Grums and give me your input. I want to learn everything about it because it's brand new to me, from a not from a playing side, but definitely from a business and a game design side.
Well, definitely. Well, you just earned a lot of tabletop fans tonight. I've got your Twitter account in the comments below the video, as well as the link to Ember's website. So people who are interested in Krixa and Ember and following you on Twitter, they got it.
Should we warn them about Saturdays?
Yeah, if you're like DW and you browse around the young and impressionable, don't follow Grums on Saturdays.
Yeah,
He's
Saturdays.
he's got a lot of fans that post a lot of good stuff.
and we do retweet. So, yeah, but that's only on Saturdays. Every other day of the week, we're safe.
And then you'll come back and they're like, oh, now I get the naval joke. That was so stupid when I first listened to it, but now it's funny.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thanks to everybody from listening, and especially those of you who joined us live on the chat. I want to say if you like what you hear, you can get this show and all the other Geek Gab shows on youtube.com/geekgab. Or if you want to do a podcast, we're on iTunes, SoundCloud, Google Play. Usually if you can get free podcasts there, you can get us. Just search for Geek Gab. And if you're on YouTube, get notified of our shows. Please hit the subscribe button. And after you subscribe, hit the bell so that you can get your email alerts so you know when we're going live. On behalf of Daddy Warpig, our special guest Mark Kern, and everybody here at Geek Gab, thank you for listening. Have a good night, and game on.